Good morning. I'm Martin Nelson with the City of Kennewick. I'll be moderating this morning's presentation on street sweeping versus catch basin cleaning study presented by John Morrow. He's a stormwater manager for the City of Ellensburg. Prior to joining the city, John worked for the City of Kirkland and Bothell, as well as Cascadia Consulting. He attended Western Illinois University and Green State College and earned a degree in public health pathology and hydrology. John will be followed by Aimee Navickis-Brasch. She's a PhD in PE. She is an engineering manager at Osborn Consulting and adjunct faculty member at Gonzaga University. Sorry about the game last night, Aimee. Where she teaches stormwater management. Also here with us to present today is Taylor Hoffman-Ballard, a PE and stormwater engineer at Osborn Consulting. I'll encourage all of you to type your questions in the chat, and we will cover as many as we can when we get there. The presentation should last about 25 minutes, so we'll have about 5 minutes for Q&A at the end. So with that, John, the floor is yours.
I'll go ahead. Can I start the first two and then we'll turn it for you? Yeah. So thank you for attending our presentation. We're going to give you an overview of the City of Ellensburg's effectiveness study. In Eastern Washington, the 2014-2019 permit required permittees to collaborate, identify, and conduct 8 effectiveness studies as part of their requirements for S8 monitoring and assessment. And this is one of those studies. Each of the permittees had to decide if they'd be a lead entity on a study or a participating entity. For the study, the City of Ellensburg selected to be a lead entity. So just a quick introduction, this is me. I was the principal manager and project manager and principal investigator on the project. And then I'll turn this to Taylor.
I'm Taylor, I'm on the far right-hand side. I was a researcher for this project. I am a stormwater engineer at Osborn Consulting. And then on the left-hand side is John Morrow at the City of Ellensburg, his professional photo, as well as Chance's professional photo, who does not work for the City of Ellensburg. So with that, we'll hand it off to John.
All right, good morning, welcome. Thank you for attending. You're a great looking group of people, although I can't see you. I would say that if I could see you. Like they said, I'm John Morrow. I work at the City of Ellensburg. I've been here about 12 years. And I'm gonna make an assumption that a lot of you that are attending this morning are permittees on the east or west side of the state. We both have monitoring in our permits. And I can remember several years ago at one of our Eastern regional meetings in Moses Lake, Ecology asked if we wanted to do into the pipe sampling or effectiveness studies. And of course, we all raised our hands for effectiveness studies, and we didn't even really know what those were at the time. But anyway, fast forward, we decided at Ellensburg to lead a sweeping comparative study with catch basin cleaning. Our conditions over here are a lot different from the west side. And I wanted to sort of see, is it better to do more sweeping or catch basin cleaning? Which would be a better BMP to do, or are they both just as important? And of course, at that time, we didn't know. And so we kicked off this study. We picked an area of town that we wanted to do this study in. And we chose it for a reason. It has a high traffic volume. It's also a hay hauling route. Ellensburg is the hay capital of the world. And this stretch of State Route 97 receives a lot of traffic and a lot of dirt and a lot of wind-driven, weather-related issues. So with that, we hired Osborn. I'm glad we did. They did a really wonderful job. Our project was not grant funded. We took this out of my stormwater utility. It was about a 2-year-long study. And I think one of the things, if you ever chose to do a street sweeping comparative study, catch basin cleaning study, it's important to have buy-in from your maintenance department. I'm lucky because those folks work for me that run the street sweepers and the Vector trucks, but a lot of cities and counties don't have that. And it's important to get buy-in right up front from not just the operators of the machinery, but their supervisors, because this study, it's really done for them. Because in the long run, we were going to make determinations whether it was better to sweep more, clean catch basins less, clean catch basins more, sweep less, and it really played a lot into their roles of their day-to-day work. So that's my advice going forward if you choose to do one of these studies. With that said, I'm going to turn it over to the experts, Aimee and Taylor, who did wonderful work. And there you are. Take it away.
Thanks, John. As John mentioned, during the 2014-2019 permit cycle, there was an increase in the catch basin inspection and cleaning schedule that increased to every 2 years. And they had the option as well to develop an inspection schedule from their maintenance records. This created a bit of a logistical and financial challenge with the shorter cleaning season in Eastern Washington. That meant that there was an increased need for staff and equipment during the shorter street sweeping and catch basin cleaning season. So the focus of our study became establishing a specific, less frequent schedule based on documented evidence. Next slide. So a possible solution that we identified to meeting the new catch basin inspection requirements was to use street sweeping. We had done a literature search and found that street sweeping can reduce sediment transported to catch basins. So our theory was that if we increase the street sweeping, we could reduce the accumulation of sediment in the catch basins, thereby reducing the catch basin cleaning frequency in Ellensburg. Next slide. So our effectiveness study, the goal ended up being to determine whether the frequency of street sweeping significantly reduces the rate of sediment accumulation in and transported from catch basins during the dry season in a semi-arid location. In terms of outcomes, we were hoping for a recommendation of a combination of street sweeping and catch basin cleaning procedures. And we were hoping to justify an Eastern Washington permit condition, allowing street sweeping to offset catch basin cleaning. And as Aimee mentioned at the beginning, this was conducted as an effectiveness study to fulfill section S8 of the permit. And specifically, we were evaluating the effectiveness of section S5, B6AII and the municipal operations and maintenance section. So the next couple slides are going to go over how we conducted the study and specifically what the study location was like. In the right-hand side, you can see an outline of the study limits along State Route 97 in Ellensburg. The speed limit was 40 miles per hour and there was an average daily traffic count of 4,000. The surrounding land use was commercial and light industrial, and as John mentioned, it's a major hay hauling route. And then on the next slide, we zoom in a little bit closer to our study location. We were looking specifically at an 1,065 feet long section of state route. It was about 69 feet wide. There were 4 lanes of traffic, 1 center lane, and 2 shoulders. There were some approaches along this length as well. And you can see from the image on the bottom side of the screen, those little red boxes indicate where catch basins were located. So there were 4 catch basins on each side of the road, 8 total catch basins, and each of those catch basins collected runoff and sent it to a swale behind the curb. So that similarity was a lot of the reason for why we selected the site. It provided equivalent areas for us to compare during the study. So the study ended up lasting 2.5 years due to one of our samples, unfortunately, catching on fire with all of the hay that was in it in an oven. It was originally supposed to last 2 calendar years. So we just extended our study from October to April at the end of the study. Data collection occurred from April to October each year. And in the image on the bottom side of the screen, you can kind of see one half of the road was called out as test site and the other half was called out as control site. So this is how we used our test site or our study location, is we split the road into 2 halves, with one side being the test site and the other half being the control site. So on the test site, what we would do is we would sweep along the curb line and clean catch basins every other month. And then on the control side, what we would do is just clean catch basins. We wouldn't sweep on the control side. So during the first year, one side was the test side and the other side was the control side. And then on year 2 of the study, we swapped which side of the road was the test side versus the control side. And from this, basically the street sweeping and the catch basin cleaning, we collected some laboratory data. Specifically, we used wet weights and moisture contents to come up with the sediment dry weight that we collected. We also tested particle size distribution and organic content, and that was for the roadway catch basin and catch basin sump sock sediment. We also collected average sediment depths in each catch basin and got a bulk density at 80% compaction in those catch basins as well. So I had just briefly mentioned the catch basin sump sock in the previous slide. This is one of the areas where we collected sediment. So on the roadway, runoff would flow into these catch basins and flow out into the swale. And what we did was we added a filter sock at the outlet of that pipe to capture any sediment during the study that would be washed out during a storm. So that sediment, we tested for wet weight as well as moisture content, and occasionally would test for particle size distribution and organic content. And this is a picture of what those socks actually looked like. They were filter socks. We would install them, we would weigh them first, so we get a kind of a tare weight of what the socks actually weighed. We would install them in the field, wait until the next time we were supposed to catch basin clean and sweep the street. And then we would go out and collect those socks and weigh them and send them to the lab for them to kind of get an estimate of how much sediment was actually sent into these socks. So one of the other things we did every other month was clean catch basins on both sides of the road. This slide just illustrates how we did that. So we would go out to one side of the road at a time. We would clean all of the catch basins on that side of the road, and then we would take that material and bring it back to the decant facility. That material would be emptied into a big blue basin, and we would use brooms, pressure hose as well to remove any sediment that had stuck to the inside of the Vector truck and get it into that blue basin. We also collected solids from when we were street sweeping the test side of the site. We would sweep just that side of the street, and then we would take that street sweeper would take that sediment back to the decant facility, and it would be emptied into those blue bins again. We would use a broom or a pressure hose to remove any remaining solids from the inside of the sweeper. So these photos just show that process and what those blue bins look like. So after those blue bins have been filled, a lot of the time the mixture could be pretty watery or saturated. So what we would do is before we weighed that material, we would allow it to sit for a week so that we could get some of those fines to settle out and then potentially de-water that material. So those valves that are called out on the side of the blue bin would be opened after a week and the water would be allowed to drain out. And we'd be left with what's shown kind of in the middle of the slide of a mixture of solids and hay. And that would be weighed to get an estimate of what the wet weight was collected from catch basin cleaning or street sweeping. And then we would take representative samples of that to get a moisture content so we could estimate the dry weight. And we would also occasionally get particle size and organic content from that as well. And then the other thing that we did at the catch basins was to get depth measurements or how much sediment had accumulated over the last couple months. So someone would go out before the catch basins had been cleaned and they would take measurements in 5 different locations in the catch basin down to where the sediment had accumulated at the bottom of the catch basin. They would do this carefully to not disturb the sediment. Then they would go back out after the catch basins had been cleaned and get 5 more measurements to get an estimate of how deep it was without the sediment. So With those two average depth measurements, we were able to estimate how much sediment depth had accumulated over the last couple months. With that, I believe I'll give it to Aimee.
Thank you, Taylor. So I'm going to walk through the results section that we have, starting with street sediment. We normalized the data, meaning that we accounted for any differences in basin sizes and the area swept on the road to determine the accumulation rate of sediment on the street. What you're looking at here on the x-axis, excuse me, the y-axis is the normalized accumulation rate in grams per linear mile per day. And on the x-axis, we have the months in which street sweeping occurred. We've color-coded the different sides of the road. So the north side of the road is always green and the south side is always orange. And since we switched sides of the road during the study for the control and test site, the test site is always dashed and the solid is always a control side. So just looking at the trend in sediment accumulation rates over the study, starting in April, we see at the test side both years a decline in sediment accumulation rates, which is consistent with what we expect to see, that the more frequently you're street sweeping, the less sediment you're going to see accumulating on the street. Then we also look at the control side, the side where we didn't sweep. And for year one, we see also the same decline, which is not what we were expecting to see, because we were expecting to see it increase or at least be similar, since it had been 6 months since the April sweep to the October sweep. One reason for that is only a third of the rainfall occurs during the study time, and remembering that Ellensburg's rainfall is only 9 inches per year. So we only got about 3 inches of rainfall during the study period itself. So we did a sweep in October on both sides of the road, and then we didn't sweep again on the control site till October the next year. And we do see an increase in sediment accumulation rates, which is what we would expect to see, because you're sweeping less, more sediment's going to accumulate on the road. Looking at the average normalized accumulation rate on both sides of both the test and the control side averaged out, what we see is that the test side is about half that of the control side. So we're seeing what we expect to see, that there's less sediment accumulation the more frequently you're sweeping. Then we took a look at the catch basin sediment depth. Again, we normalized that for the basin areas, differences that we might have had in the number of catch basins. What you're looking at on the y-axis is the depth in inches per catch basin per day. And on the x-axis, we're looking at the months in which street sweeping occurred. And the trends that we're seeing in the data for the test site is we see with more frequent sweeping, you're seeing on average, a decline in the sediment accumulation rates based on depth within the catch basin itself. When we look at trends in the control site, what we see the first year is we also see that same decline in sediment accumulation rates, which isn't what we were expecting. We're expecting to see an increase in the trend, which is similar to what we're seeing in 2019 in the green bars that we see. We were expecting to see a trend that showed an increasing accumulation rate because street sweeping wasn't occurring. One of the challenges that you have with measuring the depth in a catch basin, it's cheap, which is awesome, but you're only measuring a really small depth. The maximum we measured was 3.2 inches, and it was usually less than an inch, which is very difficult to do when you've also got water in the catch basin. So how we addressed this, we knew this going into the study. So in addition to measuring depth, we also measured sediment accumulation in the catch basins based on weight, which is what this slide focuses on. So the accumulation in grams per catch basin per day is now on the y-axis with, again, the months when street sweeping occurred. And the trend that we're seeing here in the data for both test sites in general, we see the trend is declining, a decline in the sediment accumulation rate as you have more frequent sweeping, with one exception here. We did have an issue with the property owner. It was a new property manager who just started working at the site, and the city drove past and saw that he had somebody out sweeping sediment into the catch basins because he didn't like the sediment buildup on the road. The city had already gone out and talked to all the property owners before the study started, but this new manager didn't know about the study. So it appears to be a more isolated incident that didn't occur more than one time. So, but that did have an influence on our data. So with the control side data, we expect to see this increase like we see in 2019. We expect to see sediment, that increase in the sediment accumulation rate because we're not sweeping, which we did see in 2019 on the control side. But on the control side in 2018, we did see more of a decline or not much of a change. Looking at the average sediment accumulation rates over the entire test time, comparing the test side to the control side, what we saw is that sediment accumulation rate was actually higher on the test side compared to the control, which was opposite of what we expected, and just highlights just how variable conditions can be in some of these studies. You've got so many different things happening that can influence the data. So looking at the catch basin socks, that would be the washout from the catch basins into the socks itself. And so we're looking at accumulation rates in grams per sump sock per day on the y-axis, and then again, the month in which sweeping occurred on the x-axis. We had a little hiccup the first year, so we don't have the first April sock measurement at all. But what we're seeing in the data, at least in year one, we see a decline in the sediment accumulation rates in what's washing out of the catch basins into the socks, which is what we expect to see. In the second year, we see the opposite. We see this increase, which was surprising to see this big jump here. So we went back and looked at weather data. We collected weather throughout the study as well, and we found that there was a high intensity short duration rainfall event that occurred right before the sweep, and we anticipate that that increased the rainfall energy that was available to transport sediment to the catch basin and wash it out into the sock itself. As far as the control side, we see this decline in sediment accumulation rates washing out of the catch basin for both years. This is the opposite of what we expected. We expected to see the reverse. But some variables that do influence data that probably played into this too. Catch basin sediment depth. When you get to about 60% depth within the catch basin itself, it's considered full. And the closer it is to that depth, the more likely you are to have sediment wash out of the catch basin in this case. So we have much lower depths with the max only being 3 inches. Particle size also plays a big role. We did do particle size distribution and compared the D50 of particles that were in the catch basin versus the socks. And as you can see, what was in the catch basin was around 0.8 millimeters, and what was washing out was about 0.05 millimeters. So it's much finer sediment that actually washes out of the catch basin. So taking all of that data and information that we collected, we were able to develop recommendations for the city based on a catch basin cleaning versus street sweeping frequency schedule. So on the y-axis, you have the time in years to reach 60% sump capacity. Again, we're considering 60% to be full. Based on what's reported in the literature, that's when you start seeing more sediment wash out of the catch basin. And on the x-axis, you have the number of sweeps that occurred per year. So, and then we used at least squares analysis to develop a trend line. What that means is we went into Excel, selected our points and hit trend line. And we have a pretty good R value. It's 0.93. 1 is a perfect match, so it was a pretty good match. So what this shows us is that if Ellensburg were to sweep once per year at this site, they would need to clean their catch basins about every 2 years, where if they swept 6 times per year, it'd be closer to more like 10 years. So we also considered the transferability of the recommendations from this study more qualitatively than quantitatively, because those recommendations are specific to that site, and we wanted to look at how this could be used in other places. So I'll hit on a couple of these. These are all variables that we identified in the literature that can influence sediment accumulation rates on streets or in catch basins. Some of those include land use. So the site is in an industrial area, and industrial areas are known to have higher sediment accumulation rates compared to commercial or residential areas. So if your project site is not industrial, it's one of the others, you could potentially decrease the frequency of street sweeping or catch basin cleaning compared to the recommendations. Traffic volumes can also influence the amount of sediment accumulation. At this site had 4,000 ADT, so if you have a site with higher ADT rates, you likely need to increase your street sweeping or catch basin cleaning frequency. to get similar results to what we reported. For the topography at the site, it was really flat. It was only 0.3% grade, and the steeper the slope you have, the higher runoff energy and the potential to transport sediment to catch basins. So if you have steeper streets, you might want to sweep more frequently or clean more frequently. Wind is a big factor. Wind can transport sediment to catch basins, and we observed this during the study in that there were months we had no rain and we still ended up with measurable sediment in the catch basins. Ellensburg can have 25-mile-an-hour winds. It's pretty high. So if you have a site that has lower wind speeds, you might be able to decrease the sweeping or catch basin cleaning frequency. Rainfall characteristics also play into this, especially rainfall intensity and volumes, and that can influence the rainfall energy that's available to actually transport sediment to the catch basins or wash out from that. If you have a site with a higher mean annual precipitation rate than 9 inches per hour, you're probably going to want to sweep more frequently or clean catch basins more frequently. Parking is also an issue. Obviously, if you have cars parked on the street when the street sweeper's out, the street sweeper's less effective. Trees are another one, specifically leaves or pine needles can be an issue. They can clog the grate and they can increase your sediment accumulation rates. So if you have sites, deciduous trees or evergreen, you may need to increase your frequency of sweeping or cleaning. Just noting that this particular study, there were no trees located along the street. And lastly, winter maintenance practices, which are a concern, especially in Eastern Washington. If you have a site where using sand on the roads as part of your cold climate maintenance practices is typical, you're going to have more sediment accumulation and therefore need to increase the frequency of sweeping and catch basin cleaning. Okay, so with that, with our goal was, had a couple of big main parts to this and outcomes that we were hoping to gain from this. We were trying to determine whether the frequency of street sweeping significantly reduces the rate of sediment accumulation in and transported from catch basins during the dry season in a semi-arid region. So we were able to achieve one of those, which is to develop the recommendation for a combination of street sweeping and catch basin cleaning procedures to help Ellensburg meet their permit requirements. However, we cannot justify changing the permit conditions to allow street sweeping to offset catch basin cleaning in the permit. And that was because there wasn't a significant difference between the test and control site during our study. We would need significantly more data to prove that based on some of the variability that occurs just in everyday conditions outside. So with that, that is our presentation. Do you have any questions?
All right, we've got about 2 minutes left. We've got the first question was what kind of sweeper was used for the study?
We bought those in 2017, early 18. They were grant funded from ecology. They were Elgin Crosswinds.
Okay. The next question that came up here, do you have your sweepers out running around the city on a daily basis?
Yes, during season, winter, fall, winter. Well, after the leaves fall, winter, early spring, we don't. They're put to sleep because we have snow on the ground.
All right, that's the last of the questions that were in the chat.
Looks like there's 2 more that popped up. 3 more.
Okay. All right, here we go. Could Ellensburg over time develop enough info for a modified catch basin inspection cleaning schedule?
Well, we would have to do another study, and we don't have one in the future planned.
All right, and another question here. What was the relevance of permit conditions at the site if runoff was flowing into the swale rather than a water body? We have about 40 seconds left.
We chose the swale because it was a control. We were able to capture and not lose anything. That was one of the reasons we chose this site.
All right. Well, these questions and this material will become available through the website. Thank you for presenting, guys. And if you're attending the conference, thank you for coming to Municon 2021.